together today. We are so glad you have come and joined us. Our first hymn is, "O Love That Will Not Let Me Go." The contemporary word for today is from an anonymous donor. The authentic self is the soul made visible. And our ancient text from Matthew 9:18 through 26. While he was saying these things to them, suddenly a leader of the synagogue came in and knelt before him, saying, "My daughter has just died, but come and lay your hand on her, and she will live." And Jesus got up and followed him with his disciples. Then suddenly a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years came beside him and touched the fringe of his cloak. For she said to herself, "If only I can touch his cloak, I will be made well." And instantly the woman was made well. When Jesus came back to the leader's house and saw the flute players and the crowds making a commotion, he said, "Go away, for the girl is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. But when the crowd had been put outside, he went in and took her by the hand, and the girl got up. And the report of this spread throughout the entire district. This is Dave Beckett. He has become a true friend of all of us, even though you may not have been introduced to him. When we first went to our first colloquy, he was the one that stood there and said, "This ought to be fun." And he named us the Three Amigos, and was there for us always. You're welcome.
Well, friends, welcome. It's good to be here with you. That actually happened. And I was just so fascinated. I've been telling the story of your congregation and the Three Amigos all over whenever I can. And I understand, don't you have a special name? I know you've got two amigos now, technically, but didn't I hear you came up with what you were known for?
Senoritas.
The what?
The three senoritas.
The three senoritas.
Senoritas.
Yes. Well, back a long time ago, when I was superintendent of the Alaska United Methodist Conference, we had a congregation that was very rural, Nome, and it was primarily a native Alaskan community. But yet for years and years, decades, they had been used to getting ordained clergy to come and serve as missionary pastors. And it was time for that pastor to leave, and I was responsible for finding them a pastor. And so I said, boy, we really need a native Alaskan pastor. There's just something about that. And so I called a friend of mine, Charlie, I was his pastor in Anchorage for a while, and he's a Nupiaq Eskimo, and I said, Charlie, I need you to pray about becoming a pastor. Now, that's not the usual and customary way that we find leaders in the United Methodist Church, right? He said yes after 3 weeks and did and served, and that church grew and native people came, and is now to this day, they are raising up their own pastors, native people, because of that. So I think there's some similarities going on between that story and what's happening here. I pray that this ministry will continue, and who knows how God will provide leaders. What we have today in our gospel is a sandwich story. You've got one story, and then the writer leaves it, goes to the middle, and then it comes back to that other story. So the first story is about a certain ruler, a leader, a man of high esteem in the community, and his daughter had just died. He wanted Jesus to come and heal her, raise her from the dead. So that's the top story. The middle story is about a woman considered by the community as being unclean for 12 years because of a bleeding disorder. Now, she understood that she had no standing in that community, no right to approach Jesus the same way the ruler did. So what path did she choose to get to Jesus? The back door. She sneaked up behind him and touched the hem of his garment, and in doing so, she was healed of her disease. Interesting side note. The New Testament was written in the Greek language originally, okay? And the Greek word sozo is used here. Now, that word can be translated in one of two ways, either saved or healed, made well. So what we learn from this is that salvation is about Jesus offering healing. Being saved is not just about our souls. Being saved, becoming a whole person, is the whole body, mind, and spirit. So then Matthew continues with the last part of the story. Picks up the rest of the ruler and the daughter. Jesus enters his house, touches the hand of the little girl, and immediately she is brought back to life, and the people rejoiced. Now, when you and I read our sacred scriptures, we sometimes miss important truths simply because we're not training our spiritual eyes to see them. For example, in these two stories, we see that the Spirit of God doesn't always move in the usual and customary ways. These healings did not happen in the context of the established Jewish religion. They happened on the streets. They happened through the touch of this man, Jesus. Do you ever think about how you experience God? Is it always at church? Probably not. Is it always when you're out in this beautiful country? What if we started to expect God to show up in new ways and in new places, in ways that might surprise us? A shunned woman living with shame for 12 years through no fault of her own defies social norms and pushes her way through the crowd to touch the dirtiest part of his cloak. And it worked. She was healed. A beloved girl suddenly dies, and through the touch of Jesus, a miracle happens and she's alive. This wasn't the usual practice in the Jewish religion in those days. And in 2022, we don't see people raised from the dead on a regular basis, do we? Oh, how I wish we did. A month ago, our family gathered in Anchorage at the bedside of our youngest son, Jeremy, 33 years old. We prayed fervently that Jesus would heal him. Hundreds, and I know you all as a community prayed for Jeremy to be restored to life. I laid hands on him, asking God to heal him. Like the ruler's daughter, we desperately wanted him to open his eyes and live. But the damage to his brain had been too severe. 3 days later, on Monday, February 21st at 4 p.m., our son was declared brain dead. And I texted my brothers 3 words: "It is finished." Jeremy had signed up to be an organ donor. And so we met with staff who gently guided us through that process. And they organized a ceremony right outside the hospital and raised a flag in Jeremy's honor. The next Saturday was his memorial service at St. John United Methodist Church. It was a church where I had served as senior pastor for 10 years. So difficult, and yet his life was so easy to celebrate. We did a lot of laughing at his quirky ways. We all learned things about him that we didn't know. And so after the service today, during fellowship, asked me about an amazing story that's just, I don't think it's totally appropriate from the pulpit to share with you. Something I learned about my son while he was in that coma. We learned about his loyalty, his generosity, his love for children and youth at Birchwood Camp was our main Alaska Methodist camp there. We raised $15,000 through the generosity of people as a memorial at Birchwood Camp. 4 pastors who knew Jeremy well shared through their tears the message of the gospel and how it weaved through his life. After the service, while Jeremy's friends played in a big bouncy house Jeremy had said he wanted at his funeral, Kim and I talked with old friends we hadn't seen for a long time. Now, the majority of people understood what to say and what not to say, right, at a time like this. But there were a few comments that just weren't helpful. We did not need anyone attempting to answer questions that we weren't asking. None of us asked God, why did this happen? And so it was not helpful to hear God needed another angel in heaven. We as a family were simply walking through the valley of the shadow of death, and all we needed from our faith communities was a tiny acknowledgement that they shared a little bit of our pain, so that we knew we weren't alone. Those of you who have experienced the death of a loved one understand this. I will forever be changed by Jeremy's death and forever be changed by his life. And so our family is going through this grief journey. And it really is an opportunity to learn. But it's somewhat like being a child who doesn't want to go to school. Sorry, kid, you have to go. We did not choose this school, and we hate it. But we understand that we have little choice but to learn as we walk this journey together. So we're talking about Jeremy with our friends. We are seeing therapists and pastors. Our family is gathering every Sunday by video to listen to each other's pain. We even have moments when we laugh about what Jeremy did. And none of us are blaming God. We're not even asking why this happened. What we are doing is showing up to our pain. And when a wave of grief washes over us, we don't try to suppress the tears. We let them come. And when darkness threatens to dim the light in your life, do you let it come? Because the temptation is to avoid it, deny it, fight against it. I like to go on road trips, both with my wife and alone. About 5 weeks ago, I was returning home from a month-long solo road trip to visit my family back east when I got a crazy idea. Have you ever done something crazy for love? Well, Kim was scheduled to fly from Redmond to Seattle on early Thursday morning. I was in Ohio Tuesday morning, ready to take 5 days to come home, when I got this crazy idea. I decided I would surprise her and see her before she left by driving 2,300 miles without stopping. Yeah, crazy. I remember driving through western Missouri when the first darkness, started to envelop me. And this sense of foreboding entered my mind. What would the darkness bring? And could I make it through to the light of day the next morning? My friends, when we find ourselves facing the darkness of difficult health issues, when we find ourselves about to walk through the valley of the shadow of death, when we find ourselves confronted with challenging relationships, that's the time to experience the power of prayer. That's the time to tap into the presence and the peace of God. I made it to the dawn that Wednesday morning and into 5 hours of driving in Wyoming snow. Not sure if I would make it home, but I kept pushing forward. Later that night, I was driving through Boise when Jeremy called me for what would be the last time. He was an LA Rams fan. I was a Cincinnati Bengals fan. So we enjoyed some friendly banter about the Super Bowl. And since I lost our bet, I was going to take him out to a fancy dinner. 2 days later, he would be dead. And right before the phone call ended, he said, "Dad, I love you. I love you, son." How do you end your phone calls, your visits with your loved ones? In the midst of my pain, it is so comforting to think, to know that these were our last words. Now, Jeremy's older brother, Ryan, feels this loss in a particular way because they were best friends, soulmates, and business partners. When Ryan heard the news, he was in Italy, and he cried out to me and said, "Dad, what am I going to do? He was half of my life." And since that dreadful night, Ryan is facing his new reality with hope and faith. He's starting to go back to church. Do you have kids that don't go to church? Oh, yes, even pastors do. And he said to us, I'll never forget this. He said, I literally feel Jeremy inside me. And he used the word resurrection. Oh, my heart skipped. My son, who wasn't particularly religious, was teaching his pastor father about the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Because this is exactly how I would describe the power of the risen Christ bringing light and love into the world. When we open the door to our hearts, he enters and lives within us. A long time ago, a woman experienced the touch of Jesus. She was healed. Not only from her flow of blood, but her soul as well. A little girl came to new life through the touch of Jesus. It just now hit me. 2 days ago, I got a letter from the organ donation people telling me about the families that all received parts of Jeremy's body, where his heart went, where his liver went. You know, one was a 30-year-old mother with 2 young children. And stories like that make me think about how, life, this power of God's resurrection continues, even in the bodies and lives of other people who did not know Jeremy. What we experience, even in the valley of the shadow of death, what we can experience is hope. What we experience in moments of darkness is the promise that joy can still wash over us. What we experience with Jesus inside us is that no matter what life throws at us, we will be okay. This is what we kept saying to each other. In the midst of our pain, we certainly did not feel okay then, and we do not feel okay now. But because of the resurrection of Jesus Christ, we will be okay. And friends, you will be okay. For no matter what difficulties you are facing, you will be okay. And if all is not well with your soul today, the promise of the good news of Jesus is that it will be well with your soul. This is our faith. This is our hope. This is our love. Amen.
When
I'd like to ask Becky and Sherry and Tremaine to come up here. Would you?
What else is new?
Yeah, just stand right here, Kurt. Yeah. I was talking with Ken earlier about discovering we shared woodworking skills. I enjoy woodworking in my retirement. And this cross I made, I actually make all these crosses for all of the pastors that were being ordained at our conference. So guess what? Pastor Nicole's going to get one of these, and I will get to make her. And I hired her at Ben Church and saw her journey flourish, and you've come to appreciate and to love her. So this carving, I have a ministry called Sacred Word, and what I do like to do is encourage people to pray about what's their sacred word. What is your single word that captures your whole desire for God? It's really a one-word prayer. So people have chosen love or peace. There's a couple of sacred words I can't repeat in church, but they've just been, just wonderful ways. And so I have carved something for these three because I so appreciate them, and I know you do too. When my children I would drop them off at school, I wouldn't say, have a nice day. I always said to them, remember who you are. Because in the midst of everything, I wanted them to know that they were beloved children of God. So the Greek word for beloved is agapetos. And it's in that word agape. You probably heard that word for love. Beloved is agapetos. And so I just have this little thing that says, remember who you are. Because I want these very loving people to remember. Thank you. Gosh, you just never know when grief is going to come up and hit you, do you? You know what it's like, don't you? Oh. Well, do you guys usually stand for a benediction or not?
Yeah.
I don't know. Whatever works. The postlude song is He Touched Me, which will be particularly meaningful. So friends, now go with confidence that we will awaken, we will seek out and reach for the healing solutions that our neighbors, our communities, our world needs, recovering our depth of love for all and our joy of living in this world. May the words of Jesus ring in your ears, you are not dead, you are sleeping. And may the Spirit hover, rustle, and deliver salve to your soul and spring in your step in new ways. Amen.
Amen.